As you know by now, Politico has been reporting this week that it obtained a draft opinion from February, which indicated the Supreme Court had 5 justices ready to overturn Roe versus Wade, the landmark case from the early 1970s that legalized abortion rights. So what now? Is the Supreme Court really going to follow forward with this? And then what? Here to talk about this, Alencia Johnson. She's a Democratic strategist who worked on the Biden campaign. She was also a former director of Planned Parenthood. Alencia, do you believe that this opinion suggesting being written by Alito with 4 other conservative justices does reflect what the court's going to do ultimately when the formal opinion comes down?
I 100% absolutely believe that it reflects what the court wants to do, because the reality is those 5 justices, they were hand selected because of their anti-abortion stance, unfortunately, and they have made it clear through their records, as well as the fact that in our political environment, conservatives, unfortunately, have made abortion such a political issue and made it the conservative issue. And so we see this as a draft opinion. Yes, it's a draft. And yes, for the viewers here to know that health centers are still open, abortion is still legal. But it is signaling that this is where this opinion is going to go when the final decision comes down in June.
There has been some reaction on Capitol Hill. Bernie Sanders, for example, has suggested that we should change the Senate filibuster rules and then have an up or down vote on Roe versus Wade and abortion rights. And yet the White House has pushed back, saying that even if you change the filibuster and require only 50 votes, there still are not 51 votes for the Democrats to codify Roe versus Wade. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it shows you some of the frustration in the Democratic Party and the frustration that we are not bold enough in pushing people to get in line. If this was the opposite side of the aisle, it doesn't matter what ideology or what end of the spectrum you're on. If you're a Republican, you vote Republican. And so on Democratic side, we have to change the filibuster rules, because I've heard the arguments that, well, if we do this to codify Roe, Republicans are going to do the same thing and change the filibuster rules to do whatever they need to get their agenda passed. That's true, whether or not we get rid of the filibuster. So 1, we should. And 2, the highest elected Democrat should be pushing the party, every single member of the party, into falling in line. This is about abortion rights. This is about our base. This is also about delivering for Democrats who want us to do something. Our party should not be beholden to 1 or 2 senators who unfortunately are trying to play this moderate political game, but that's actually not going to work. And it's going against what the 70% of Americans want, and that is to not see Roe v. Wade overturned. And so I agree with Senator Sanders. I agree with my former boss, Senator Elizabeth Warren, in the filibuster and move forward so we can codify Roe.
That one senator seems to be Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia. He's staunchly opposed to codifying Roe versus Wade, generally seems to be against abortion rights. His poll numbers have been rising over the last year and a half, despite his defiance of, or maybe because of his defiance of the Biden administration. So what, if anything, what sort of leverage would a Biden administration have with a Senator Manchin to try to convince him, hey, this is really important, you got to do it?
Well, I think it's the conversation of, is he going along with Democratic values? It is in our party platform to be pro-choice. It is in our party platform to remove the Hyde Amendment, to also ensure that we are protecting abortion rights. It's also, poll numbers show that, again, 70% of Americans, which I'm pretty sure the numbers are very similar in West Virginia, really do support protections of access to abortion care. Now, of course, people of all ideologies have a varying degree of what they believe that looks like, but I'm pretty sure in a state that has such horrific healthcare outcomes for low-income people, has so many issues when it comes to poverty, that they actually need to understand that abortion care would help solve some of those issues in regards to making sure that people have access to the care that they need. And so there's this conversation to be had with Senator Joe Manchin. And then I'm going to take the White House outside of this, and I'm just going to put on my Democratic strategist hat. If Joe Manchin doesn't get in line, he should be challenged. He should not actually be sitting in that Democratic seat if he is not going to do what the will of the people is, and that is to protect abortion care and to not be beholden to the special interests that continue to line his pockets so that he doesn't fall in line with what the majority of people want.
Yeah, there are a lot of progressives. I think Joe Manchin should have been challenged by a progressive anyway, simply because of his blocking of minimum wage and everything else that on the Democratic agenda that he
Absolutely.
seems to have put on ice. What now? I mean, if the Supreme Court goes ahead and gets rid of Roe versus Wade, it turns it back to the states. There will be some states which will protect abortion rights. There will be some states, mostly I imagine Republican states in the South, where it'll be next to impossible for women to get an abortion. What then?
There are several states that have trigger laws on the books just ready for this decision to come down in their favor to overturn Roe v. Wade and overturn abortion access. And then there are some states, of course, Democratic states. You mentioned it. Yes, these are Republican-led states that have these trigger laws, and Democratic states, a lot of them have laws that expand and protect access. Honestly, and this is really sad to say, I really think this is going to galvanize people and bring back the enthusiasm that Democrats in our base, and including independents and swing voters, really need going into November. And so what we need to do as Democrats, understanding that this could actually end up being the final opinion. The Supreme Court told us that this was a very real document. So we won't know whether or not this is where they are going to rule, but we need to operate as if it is. And so therefore we have to take this momentum and continue to build upon it and through November, because if you overlay a map of where all of our rights are being taken away, from voting rights to the attacks on the LGBTQ communities, to we also have a big immigration case that's going to be coming up in June where dangerous immigration laws are being passed. They all overlap in these states that they're taking away a reproductive rights, abortion rights. And Democrats need to make that case very forcefully in the way that Vice President Harris did last night at the Emily's List gala, which I was so glad to hear that energy. We need that same energy from today up until the election day in November.
And in terms of lighting a fire under Democrats and changing the dynamics of the 2022 midterms, as a strategist, is it better that this came out now to sort of change the dynamics of perhaps the discussion about the midterms, or would the shock value if this had, say, come out the first week in July when the Supreme Court normally makes its big news, would that have been better if this had been pushed back a bit?
I'm honestly grateful that it came out now so that people can start paying attention. Too often, voters start to get engaged in the fall. And to be honest, Democrats and actually campaigns on both sides start to take the summer and really start talking to voters. But right now, we are having this conversation going into primaries for Senate races, congressional races, governor's races. And so we are able to use this now as a critical issue and almost a test for Democratic candidates up and down the ballot, from your congressional candidates all the way to your governor's candidates, to state legislatures, to have a conversation about where they stand. I'm so grateful that Senator Schumer said we are going to have a vote in the Senate next week about the whole Women's Health Protection Act so that we know where people stand. And I think it's imperative that we're using this moment, and I'm grateful for this moment, before people check out over the summer and they know what's at stake so they can stay engaged for the next 6 months until the midterms.
Some of the women in my family who are older than me say it is just unfathomable that 50 years after Roe, there's a possibility now that Roe versus Wade might be rolled back, that there might be states where they lose sort of abortion rights. And the family members are just sort of flummoxed. They're both shocked, maybe not surprised because they've seen what the Republicans have been doing. But there's the big question of, well, what do we do now in terms of citizen activism and in terms of getting involved? Is it enough now just to pay attention to where people's position is on abortion in terms of the fall elections? Should there be marches? Should there be demonstrations? How do people express their anger in a way that's productive?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I get that question all of the time. Yes, be paying attention. Get out there and rally at your state houses, also at your city councils. Get out there and rally in a very respectful way. We don't promote violence, but show peaceful demonstrations that this is a critical issue. Also, please, please, please donate to abortion funds. Yes, donate to large reproductive rights organizations, but also pay attention to these smaller abortion funds that are actually going to fill the gap for these women who will be in these trigger law states. And they need to get to an Illinois or a Colorado or a California or a New York to get abortion access. So we have to figure out a way to walk and chew gum, to do two things at the same time. One, ensure that the immediate need for the people who will be impacted the most, which are typically low-income women, people who are in rural areas, people who are wage workers, women of color, that's who the attack is really going to impact the most. Make sure that they are supported through the abortion funds. And at the same time, call your senators, call your members of Congress, call your governor's office, call your district attorneys, and make sure they know where you stand on the issue. And then when you find the candidate that is running for election in your district or wherever you are, make sure that you are working for them and helping them cross the finish line and get elected in November.
Given the polling numbers you mentioned, 70% of Americans support abortion rights under Roe. I suppose not much of a surprise, therefore, that Fox would try to change the narrative and make it less about, well, these rights might be taken away and more. Oh, the institution of the United States Supreme Court somehow has been damaged, as if the Supreme Court sort of damage would be somehow more than what women would be going through. But having said that, there is something, I suppose, within Washington about a leak of this kind. Should there be an investigation? Should the FBI get involved in your estimation?
So my activist hat says, God bless the person who leaked this, to leak this opinion, because we needed to know where they were thinking. If we're talking about the legitimacy of the court, I'm so sorry. They put Justice Kavanaugh on the court, and there was all of this overwhelming evidence that he sexually assaulted someone. So I'm sorry, conservatives have already delegitimized the court. And so they want to talk about this now about a leak when they, to your point, what you just said, they care more about a leak and looking like the party that actually operate under the guise of statesmanship, when yet, to your point, they don't care about women. This is the party that says we're the party of family values. Well, you don't care about abortion rights. You won't pass paid family leave. You won't give us universal child care. So what is it that you actually stand for? And to be honest, like I said, I'm grateful that this was leaked so that people could use this moment to galvanize and also see exactly where the conservatives stand. And also, if we want to talk about whether or not the court is operating with integrity, let's talk about there's a justice there who has a wife who was calling the chief of staff under the Trump White House and telling him that we're going to do everything we can to make sure Trump is still elected in office. So I'm sorry, Fox News, you have something else that you want to talk about when he talks about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and funny how Fox News decided they didn't want to touch the story about Clarence Thomas's wife, but in any case.
Like amnesia.
Yeah, Alencia Johnson, Democratic strategist, worked in the Biden campaign, former director of Planned Parenthood. Alencia, thanks so much for doing this, we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.